Good evening. I'm Reverend Solomon Kinlock Jr., Senior Pastor of Triumph Church, and I want to welcome you tonight to Code Red. It is a series of critical community conversation that are designed in order to address the disparities that COVID-19 has uncovered, and more importantly, to address the multitudinous number of issues that we already knew was in our community, but it has been exacerbated during this crisis. Before we move any further, because this is an ecclesiastical conversation that has been called, I'm going to ask the former chief of police of the city of Detroit, who is also a minister here at Triumph Church, to give us our invocation. Reverend Ralph Gottby.
Let us go before the throne of grace. Father God, we thank you so much, for you have told us, for unto us a child is given, unto us a son is born, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. Father God, as we embark upon these community conversations, we invoke the presence of your Holy Spirit, that he may lead us and guide us in all truths and bring all truths back to our remembrance, understanding that the Holy Spirit is the discerner of thoughts and intents of the heart. As we go about to go through policy and issues, Father God, anoint us. Allow your Holy Spirit to reveal the truth, that we might be led to higher heights and deeper depths. In Jesus' name we pray and ask it all. Amen.
Because I have not forgotten my elementary academic experience, I remember standing toward the flag with my hand over my heart and was tutored and taught I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. But I must admit that from those days at a tender age, I must admit that as I stand here now as a man, that based on what I've been tutored and taught, don't look a lot like what I see. Particularly when you look across the length and breadth of this country, and urban community corners are occupied with young teenage African-American men and women who have no motivation and inspiration to strive for a new level of life, who have already decided that where they are is where they want to be. It don't look much like what I've been tutored and taught when I see the fact that we still don't have adequate access to affordable care and quality health and medical care. It don't look a lot like what I've been tutored and taught when I see my friends that our women are still being marginalized, degraded, and disrespected. It don't look like what I've been tutored and taught, particularly in the realm and in the area of education, when our children are still struggling in dilapidated facilities. Also, there's still disproportionate allocation of resources in our school districts. And more importantly, even now, as we seek to transition to online learning, we're at a place and we're at a point in which, my friends, that we are still struggling with a digital divide. It is for that reason that this becomes a platform not only to address those issues, but to address one particular issue tonight, voter suppression. Our rights are being degraded, disrespected, and disregarded. But because of these esteemed guests tonight who serve on the front line along with so many of you, we're going to provide you with the equipment to enable and empower you and the information and the opportunity to make sure that every vote matters. I'm hippopotamus happy and peacock proud to be hosting tonight two individuals who stand on the front line of service and sacrifice. We welcome tonight Detroit City Clerk, Ms. Janice Winfrey. Welcome tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
We also welcome tonight Mr. Don Calloway, who is the president of the National Voter Protection Action Fund. Welcome, Mr. Calloway, tonight.
Thank you, Pastor.
I want to just cut across the formality tonight and get to the heart of the issue. And Ms. Winfrey, I want to begin with you tonight. Why is it? Because there seems to be, with a level of duplicity and repetition, we continue to find issues and discrepancies on election night. Why can't we get it right on election night?
Part of the reason, the greater part of the reason, is because of the legislation by which we're required to administer elections. You see, in the state of Michigan, we're the only state of very few that will not allow clerks to process or pre-process absentee ballots. We don't want to count them. We only want to be able to open and take off the stub and verify that that voter that signed that envelope is the actual voter. That takes legislation change. In addition, we're one of very few states that cannot recount a canister because it's requested. See, in the state of Michigan, if a poll worker or an election day worker makes a mistake, transpose a number on the transfer case, that transfer case is deemed unrecountable. Thereby, you can't prove the integrity of the process. And thirdly, in the state of Michigan, we can only count a ballot. We can only process an absentee or a mail-in ballot if we get it by 8:00 p.m. election night. Many of ballots come in throughout the state after 8:30, but they're postmarked on election day. They're postmarked November 3rd or whatever election day may be. But if we get them past 8:00, we can't count them. I've been fighting that some of these legislation changes be made, some of them be made so that we, those of us who administer elections, our poll workers and our voters are not marginalized, and in no way are we disenfranchised. That needs to happen. And because it doesn't happen, Detroit, like many other municipalities in the state of Michigan, suffer at the hands of inadequate and overworked poll workers to do the job without making mistakes after working 20+ hours.
Ms. Calloway, you can chime in because you deal with this stuff on a national basis.
Yes, sir.
What are some of the trends that you're seeing based on what our city clerk just addressed tonight?
Well, she's absolutely right that the challenges that happen, particularly in urban communities on the voting, in any entire universe of voting, are because of state-based legislation. I think it's extraordinarily important that we establish the historical context of how we got here and why we are here. In 1965, the Department of Justice, as the culmination of so much of what Dr. King and all of his colleagues fought for, passed the Voting Rights Act. The most important function of the Voting Rights Act was found in Section 5 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which created a procedure called pre-clearance, which said that in states that have a history, proven and pernicious and intentional history of suppressing African American votes, these states, before they made changes to voting procedures, in any universe of changes that could be made that affect the procedures of voting, they had to apply for and receive pre-clearance from the Department of Justice before they were able to make any changes to voting processes or procedures. Now, that did not sit too well with those who seek to suppress votes, primarily African American votes, primarily in the South, although it is important to realize that voter suppression is not and never has been particularly a Southern thing. So, from 1965 to 2013, there are lawyers and, I'll just say, bad guys, bad people who sought to overturn Section 5 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. They finally succeeded in 2013 with the Alabama case of Shelby County versus Holder. Shelby County versus Holder took away the requirement that states apply for and receive pre-clearance before creating changes to the voting processes on any state level, county level, or municipal level. Now, this is very long-winded, but it's important because it means that after 2013, after Shelby County versus Holder, as the clerk very well knows, we saw nationwide a series of changes to voting that we saw the proliferation of voter ID laws, primarily throughout the South. We saw the shortening of hours at polling places. So polling places now close at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. We saw the reduction in the number of places that people can go to vote. So Lowndes County, Alabama, my parents' home county, Bloody Lowndes, 500-mile radius county, there might be 2 polling places. It makes it extraordinarily difficult to vote. And all of these changes would not have been allowed if there still had been the pre-clearance requirements of Section 5. So where we are today is in a universe where we are 58 days, as of today when we're recording this, we are 58 days outside of the presidential election, which we, of course, think will be extraordinarily consequential. The suppression is baked into the process, and we find ourselves with competent and capable public officials and elected officials and people of goodwill like ourselves who want to get our communities out to the ballots. We find ourselves already substantially behind the 8 ball because of national policy that's put into place in Lansing and in other state capitals that has been allowed because we have no federal protections like we had with Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, so we founded the National Voter Protection Action Fund 2 years ago to do 2 things. To crowdfund with small dollar donations support for people who have actual voter protection plans in place, to support places like Detroit, to support places like Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, who exist in these quintessentially crucial swing states and have actionable grassroots voter protection plans to get people to the polling places. But in off years, and Muhammad Ali once said that the battle is won when I'm dancing on the road or when I'm fighting in the swimming pool long before I dance under those lights, when I'm running on the road, excuse me, not dancing on the road. The fight is won against voter suppression in state legislatures, in city councils, in county councils, long before an election year. And we have to take up these policy fights, as the clerk is referring to. She knows what she's talking about. We have to take up these policy fights in off-election years, and that is the grunt work that's not exciting because it does not involve the horse race of electoral politics. But at the end of the day, if we're not able to get to the ballot box, if we're not able to cast our votes fully and freely, then we won't be able to succeed and elect people who want to implement policy to support African American communities and rural communities and justice nationwide. So ultimately, we exist and we were created to take on these legislative policy fights which free people like Clerk Winfrey up to be able to do her job and administer free and fair elections. Sometimes Michigan has gotten it right. Michigan has automatic voter registration, but there are policy areas in which Secretary of State Benson, we expect her to lead in getting things a little bit better. Election day should be a day off nationwide. Full stop. There's no excuse that we have to take days of work off to go vote. That amounts to a poll tax. If you cannot afford to take time off, if you have an hourly wage job, that is a poll tax. And Michigan has same-day registration, but we don't have a long enough early voting period. So there are several different policy areas, in addition to the actual very practical things that you mentioned about not being able to count votes that come in literally after 8:30, that the state can work on. And we hope that after the clerk and her partnership with Secretary Benson, after you administer a fair and properly run election this November, we need to turn our eyes toward Lansing to work on statewide policy to make sure that our people have access to ballot boxes now and in the future.
That is correct.
That lends itself to the next question, because I see the partnership that has been announced between you and Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who will be with us on the 4th Sunday night of this community conversation. But what should we expect out of that partnership? What is that partnership going to really look like?
What it's always should have looked like.
Okay.
Elections is not just a department's charge. It is a community's charge. We are in this together, and in order for us to administer successful elections, we need the entire community. So I appreciate Secretary Benson for doing her job, for partnering with us to ensure that we have all the equipment that we need, to ensure that we are able to use her resources to get into venues that we typically are not open to us, i.e. the stadiums, so that we can allow for our receiving boards. I expect elections to look a lot differently because of the partnership, because she's taking a personal interest to ensure that Detroit gets it right. And by the way, we don't have early voting in the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. The best that we can do is what we do, and that is allow our voters 30 days prior to Election Day to come into one of our over 20 vote centers and cast their absentee ballot in person.
That's correct. So we do not have you don't have early voting. You have in-person absentee, and that is a substantial difference. You're absolutely correct.
But now that the Michigan voter has the benefit of voting absentee with no justification, no excuse at all, you're looking for an increase on Election Day. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Have you received from legislation any administrative relief to assist you in processing and counting those votes?
None at all. None at all. But we do have an agreement whereby I'm able to work my poll workers in shifts for this particular election. We were never able to do that. We always got pushback on it. We tried, but we always got pushback. But this time, the Secretary of State decided that, you know what, in order for us to process these ballots accurately, in order for us to not have so many poll worker errors, human errors. You're working over 20 hours. You're going to make some errors. We're able to administer this upcoming elections in shifts, and that's going to mean a paradigm shift for us as voters, for our citizens, because it will no longer be an election day, but there will be an election week. And so we expect to get about 160, 200,000 absentee ballots to count. We know we can't process that in a night. We're not even trying to. We're going to process that over the course of 2 to 3 days, whatever it takes to get the work done precisely.
There's been a lot of talk tonight about recount. Why is it that we don't hear that issue to the level that we hear about it in Detroit?
In Michigan?
Yes.
Because if a poll worker who's worked 20 hours locks up that transfer case with a seal, and that seal number is 1234. But then she also writes in the poll book that same seal number as 1243. There's a discrepancy in the seal numbers. That transfer case cannot be recounted. One of the poll workers, you have 4 on a board, forgets to sign his or her name in the poll book, and it's listed on the seal certificate. That canister cannot be recounted. The only way you're going to be able to show, to demonstrate that this process is pure and that the integrity is real, is that you're able to recount every canister, every ballot, every time. You can't do that in the state of Michigan.
Don, are you seeing that across the country? Does that seem to be a tremendous pattern? Because we don't hear about it. It's been magnified in the city of Detroit for so many reasons, in Michigan for so many reasons. Are you seeing that across the country?
So we don't see nationally the issue of the specific canisters and the registration numbers. However, most jurisdictions, and to be clear, the jurisdictions of urban areas where black folks can come out and vote and turn the tide of elections always have particularized and nuanced rules. The goalpost is always moved, whether it be Allegheny County, which is Pittsburgh in the swing state of Pennsylvania, whether it be Fort Lauderdale down in Miami, which we know is perpetually purple, whether it be Dallas and Houston in Texas, which can swing if you have enough participation. There will always be nuanced and frankly difficult circumstances placed between certain populations and the ballot box, and we see the clerk explaining it very, very clearly. 58 days out, what should we be encouraging our people to do? Not even our people. What should we be encouraging all Americans to do in light of a universe where we have very clearly identified the hurdles between communities and the ballot box in these next 58 days, which, by the way, we will not change by policy, right, in these next 2 months? What should we be telling our people to do? Nationwide, and also particularly here in Detroit, we should be encouraging everyone to get a mail-in ballot and to return it in person. We should, secondly, be encouraging everyone to participate in the in-person absentee process. We should not be waiting till Election Day to stand in long lines, onerous lines. We should not be waiting till election day to get people to decide they want to participate. We have 58 days from now, from 40 days out of the election, we have 58 days to make a plan to vote. And you have 40 days to find a way to cast your vote. And I think that that's what we have to get people accustomed to, and we have to start getting that message out there, that do not wait until election day. If you want to wait until election day, your duty on election day should be to be a poll watcher or a poll judge or a volunteer of some sort. And frankly, if you don't need the money, and there are options and programs that will pay people to do that, but if you don't need it, you should show up out of your goodwill to participate in making ours a better democracy. But over the next 58 days, you should find and identify a time and a plan that you will vote not on election day, and make sure that your voice is heard and that your vote is counted well ahead of time. The last thing that I will say is that I think that there's a certain psychology to elections, and the clerk is absolutely right. I promise I did not just come ready to parrot everything you've said, but she seems to be on point here. We should be prepared, messaging-wise, nationwide, to move from election day thinking to an election period. And in my wildest dreams, I would hope that that's a 30-day election period that culminates on election day, as opposed to an election day and this is the 12 hours that we are confined to being able to vote, because frankly, that is voter suppression. That is a poll tax. That is the shortening of time to participate in our democracy. We need to move to a period where we are thinking about an election period in which to participate. And I wonder not only what that would do from a campaign perspective, but the bottom line is that it would remove barriers between the individual and the ballot box by increasing the amount of time that you have to participate.
So we're expecting record number of absentee ballots, mail-in ballots. How can you ensure that all of those ballots get counted in a timely fashion?
Well, again, we have a plan to count a little differently than we've ever done in the city of Detroit. We'll be working with shifts, and it will be election week, whereby the first shift may look like something 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., and then they go home. And a smaller shift will come in and just open. And then that same shift from Tuesday will come back at 7 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday and the like. We're doing something a little different because we're calling on particular skill sets for this election. We are administering during a pandemic, and I think people are forgetting that. That lays very heavily in the city of Detroit, which was at one time, during the height of COVID-19, was considered a hot spot. So we're looking at all those people who are on furlough, those people who are at home working. We're asking them, we're identifying particular groups, the ministers in the various churches throughout the city, the teachers, the principals, and the Divine Nine. We know we have a sorority sister on the ballot, and I'm a nonpartisan clerk, but I know the Divine Nine is interested because Senator Harris asked for our help. And so the Divine Nine, those black sororities and fraternities have come together. We've reached out to them aggressively, and they're working with us as team leaders to ensure that that poll workers' work is tight at the end of the day.
Pastor, the last thing I would add, the clerk's exactly right. The last thing I would add is that as we look to an election period, as we look into making sure that the elections are administered fully and fairly for everyone, we need to be okay going to bed not knowing who won congressional races, not knowing who won the presidential races, because we would rather get it right than get it fast. And that is a crucial element here. We have to give not only this clerk, but all clerks and election judges and administrators all around the country the opportunity and the time and the space and, frankly, the professional courtesy to get it right. I don't care Tuesday night. I don't need to know. That'll be all right, you know. Wait on the Lord. Oh, we're in the house, right? Wait on. I'm okay knowing Thursday. I'm okay knowing Friday. I'm okay knowing a week from now if I know that they took the time to get it right. If I know that they took the time to count every absentee ballot and to make sure that everyone who wanted to participate had a chance to participate. But that's part of the big picture kind of hopes and dreams stuff. But it's good to start getting that word out there that we might not know on Tuesday, and that does not mean that this clerk nor any other clerk has not done their job. As a matter of fact, it might mean they're doing their job better.
Okay. People are just curious by nature. How do you change that mindset?
By repeating it. By repeating it. And every time they see me and hear from me, they will hear election week. Partnering with the Secretary of State, the governor, we're all saying the same thing. It is going to be an election week in the state of Michigan. And might I add, we will also have over 30 drop boxes for our voters to, when they vote their ballot and they don't want to go to a vote center, that's okay. We'll have over 20 of those throughout the city. They can go to one of the drop boxes and just put that ballot in there, that voted ballot in the drop boxes. Those drop boxes all have cameras on them, and they will be emptied every couple of hours throughout the day. So messaging is so important. Is so important. So we'll be doing a lot of that for this election.
So this presidential election, we see and we can sense, based on every poll, is going to be razor thin. And it's going to come down to cities like Detroit, and in many cases, those recounts. How do we ensure that in cities like Detroit, that there are no discrepancies and errors that compromise the election?
Slow and methodical work counting at those absentee voter boards. Slow, methodical work, good, tight leadership, and then we'll just continue to do our job. If they allow us to do our job, we will do our jobs, but we're pressured to get the results out. We're pressured to get it out by the 10 o'clock news, 11 o'clock news. We're pressured every step of the way. But like this brother said here, we're gonna take our time, and I'm gonna catch it anyway. I'm going to catch it if I go too fast. I'm going to catch it if I go too slow. But at the end of the day, I want to get it right. We must get it right. And so we're going to take our time. We're going to count those ballots, and we're going to give you the results when we get them, and we will be able to ensure a recount if necessary, even with our crazy laws, because our work will be looked at. It will be monitored all night long. That's how we're going to get it done in the city of Detroit.
Don, is that something that y'all are working on a national level across the country?
Very, very much so, Pastor. I think that everybody is accountable, and there are 3 levels of plans that have to be in place. Everyday citizens need to be accountable for making a plan to vote over the next 58 days. And I would encourage people that their plan should not be them going to a polling place on election day. People should be making their individual plan to vote. And if you have your plan, you should be making sure that your neighbors, your relatives, and friends are also making a plan to participate. Secondly, we have to hold elected officials accountable, even our SARAs. Elected officials should have plans to freely and fairly administer elections. And I think, Pastor, you're asking all the right questions, and Madam Clerk, you are sufficiently explaining. I look forward to hearing from the Secretary of State of explaining not only in Detroit, Wayne County, but what is your plan to freely and fairly administer elections going through recounts? Elected officials need to have a plan. Thirdly, I think that in recognition of what I was trying to lay out at the beginning of this discussion, I know I can be verbose, but the third level of planning is that we all need to have a definitive legislative plan to make sure that we are not in this position 2 years from now. If we consider 2013, we know that 40,000 votes were suppressed in Milwaukee, and the occupant of the White House won the state of Wisconsin by 30,000 votes. We know that 20,000 black Pittsburghers were cut off waiting in line, and the president won the state of Pennsylvania by 20,000 votes. Now, perhaps not all of them would have voted for Hillary Clinton. We know that. But I would ask, we know what happened to Stacey Abrams in 2018 down in Georgia. Perhaps all of those who were purged from ballots would not have voted for Stacey Abrams. But I would suggest, what have we done policy-wise, legislatively, since 2016, since 2018, to change and alter the policy environments that allowed for that pernicious and intentional voter suppression to take place? And sadly, the answer is we have done nothing. So what is our collective plan, not only as African Americans, not only as urban dwellers, but as Americans who believe in free and fair democracy? What is our plan to take to Lansing, to take to Harrisburg, to take to Washington, D.C. in January? What is our plan to make sure that this doesn't happen for the next cycle, which is in 2022? Because if we're talking about this 60 days out, then we have already lost. because the suppression is baked into the process. So 3 levels of planning. Everyone needs to have a plan to vote, and if you have a plan, then you need to help your neighbors come up with their plan to vote. Elected officials and those who are administering our elections need to have a plan for recounts, need to have a plan for absentees, need to have a plan for mail-ins, need to have a plan for socially distant in-person voting. And thirdly, all of us need to have a legislative and thought and policy plan looking forward.
Ms. Winfrey, we are talking about the legislation that's needed. How can we beat the drum in order to make sure that all of citizens and residents of Michigan understand that? Because that's something we don't hear a lot about, and I think we need to talk more about that.
Absolutely, because it's a huge hindrance. But, you know, at the end of the day, I always tell people, talk to your state legislators, talk to your council people, make sure you know who they are, you know, because it's important. Those are the ones that we work with to get legislation written. Those are the ones that we approach and say, look, I need you to work on this, that, these, and the others. And there are some that have been very helpful. But unfortunately, we don't hold our elected officials accountable, in my opinion, as we should. I take full responsibility for the administration of elections, good, bad, or indifferent. It falls on me. It's my responsibility. But it's also your responsibility, legislator, to give us the tools and the laws that we need so that we can properly administer. Because the way our laws are now, we're disenfranchising our voters. We're hurting our poll workers, and we're making life very hard for election administrators. We've got to hold our elected officials accountable, and you've got to know who you're voting for at the end of the day.
Are you doing any work with the Attorney General, Dana Nessler, that will be here in a couple of weeks in order to make sure that there's a fair and transparent election?
No, I haven't done any work with her at all.
If she was here, what are some of the things that you would ask?
I would share with her exactly what I've shared with you. I would ask her to help me to get us some updated election laws. I would ask her to look at the numbers and look at the other states. I would ask her to see that there are less than 5 states in the United States that are not allowed to recount every canister upon request. Michigan is one of them, and that's sad. That holds us all back. That puts a cloud of suspicion over the whole process. What do you mean you can't recount it? And then people get that confused with, my vote wasn't counted. No, we didn't say it wasn't counted. We said it wasn't recounted. So those are some of the conversations. Those are some of the things that I would say and have that conversation with her.
Don, if the AG was here, because you're seeing this on a national level across the country, it's not just in Michigan, it's not just in the city of Detroit. What makes it so poignant in the city of Detroit is because you have a predominantly African-American city. How do we ensure that our vote matters? And what can our attorney generals do across this country to involve themselves in the process and make sure that that happens?
That's a great question. So, twofold. The attorneys general are very verbose in talking about and holding out the idea that they are the state's chief law enforcement officer. And that's cute. So, knowing the power you have, because they're generally so fond of talking about the specific and enumerated powers that they have, we need to know exactly how you will use your power in the voting context. So if the Attorney General were here today, I would ask for assurances of a couple of things. Number one, sword and shield. Number one, that you will prosecute anyone who we believe to be intentionally suppressing African American turnout or African American participation at the ballot box. Why do we think? We've seen the Kyle Rittenhouses of the world. This is Michigan. I don't have to use hypotheticals. We saw the multiple gentlemen who had long guns and approached the governor's mansion. Why do we think that they won't show up to polling places in Detroit? Are we prepared for that? Why do we think that won't happen, right? There's nothing that these people won't stoop to maintain power. Why do we think that won't happen? And can we get assurances from the state's top law enforcement officer that those people will be prosecuted for intimidating our community with guns? Right? Number two, historically, states' law enforcement officers, yes, primarily in the South, however, throughout the country, have used their power to prosecute African Americans who attempt to bring other people to the ballot box, who attempt to expand voting procedures, and we need to know that she would not use her office to do that. That seems like a very easy concession to make, but we need to hear it said. And if she were here tonight, I know you would have asked her, Pastor. I know that you would have gotten the assurance, Madam Clerk. And I think that that's a very reasonable thing, because we need people to sometimes state the obvious. We need to know that despite the political pressures of the day, you will not use the awesome magnetized power of the Attorney General's office as the top law enforcement officer in the state to prosecute our people for attempting to expand the electorate and participate in the process just like everyone else. But again, I go back to, I need to know, and our community needs to know, that you will protect us from being intimidated before, during, or at the polling places, because that's a very real thing, and we need to stop acting as though we're participating in a fair process with everybody else in this country. And lastly, I would ask her to support a comprehensive legislative agenda for Lansing in January that supports the expansion of ballot box access across the board statewide.
So with all of this recruitment for poll workers, because you are recruiting poll workers and we are working with you in order to do that, $600 a day,
That is
$1,200 for 2 days.
That's right.
$1,200.
That's good money.
That's $1,200 for 2 days.
Tax-free dollars.
And so you're looking for how many?
You know, I hate to give numbers
Okay.
because my thing is just apply. But we need a minimum of 500 poll workers right now, today, to work with us, to sign up and work with us. And the process is very easy. They can do one of a few things. They can go on our website, detroitmi.gov/elections, and go and fill out and submit their application that way. They can call our offices at 313-876-0231 and ask that way. Or they can send a request. They can email a request to brookins@detroitmi.gov. That's BROOKINSY@detroitmi.gov. A number of ways. They can come into the office and pick up an application. All of our precincts will be open on Election Day, every last one of them, because we want people to have a choice, so they can, if they want to come on Election Day, if they want to work at the precincts on Election Day, we're hiring for precinct workers as well. So, yeah, we're hiring poll workers. We've upped our pay because we've upped our requirements and what we expect on Election Day.
Now, what's your plan to train all of those workers?
That plan is going on as we speak. For so we train, all of our poll workers are trained at Wayne County Community College. Wonderful, wonderful partners. And because we don't have the students are in the building, we're able to have all of the buildings at the various sites, and we have all of them in the city of Detroit. So that's going on now in the mornings, during the day, and the evenings. And then for our counting of the absentee, that's going to look a little different. We will be holding those training classes at TCF, at the actual facility where they'll be counting the ballots so they can be familiarized with the process.
What training do you think poll workers need that you've seen across the country? I mean, because this is just a problem.
It is. It is. I think that poll workers need to understand that if someone shows up, they should not leave without casting a ballot. Yeah. Perhaps, in the worst case scenario, they will end up casting a provisional ballot. But if you show up to vote, and frankly, in the worst case scenario, you get prosecuted for lying about who you were, right? And we know that that doesn't happen in this country. But if you show up to vote, you should be able to cast a vote. And maybe you end up with a provisional ballot. Maybe someone ends up looking into were you who you said you are. But do not walk out of there, and do not let people, as poll workers, do not let people walk out of there without participating in this election process. I think that poll workers need to know, and I'm sure this is part of the training, poll workers need to know what the state ID requirements are in any particular jurisdiction. They need to know what acceptable forms of ID are, and they also need to know the hours of balloting. But I think it's very crucial, and we see this nationwide, people need to know, do not leave that line. if the process, if the time of the balloting, if the time of voting for this particular polling place ends while you are in that line. You are not to go home. I don't care if it's cold. I don't care if it's rainy. You are to wait, and you are to not leave that polling place, regardless of the time of day, without participating, without casting a ballot.
May I say,
Yeah.
there's a nationwide problem with poll workers, and that is the younger generation. They're not doing it. Poll workers traditionally the average age is about 65 years old to work a 20-hour day. They're tired easily. They don't have as much energy, and it's harder for them to manipulate the technology, the laptops, and the scanning devices. They're not interested in learning, but they're dedicated and they're faithful. So my plan is to recruit some of the people that are still in the workforce today. When I say young, you don't have to be a millennial, but Jesus, can we get some 40 and 50-year-olds, that work every day, that are used to following instructions verbally and the written word as well? Those things are important, and have some energy. Those things are important, but it's the faithful, very senior citizen that works every time. And it's not that they're not well educated or well intentioned, it's just that they're tired and they're forgetful. And we need some younger people who are working every day, who are grinding every day to participate in the process. And that's what we're getting now. And mostly it's because people are home now, working from home, and they're willing to take that day or 2 or 3 off to work with us. So it'll work for this election, but the mindset needs to be changed. This is a national problem, not a Detroit or a Michigan problem.
Don, how are y'all engaging young adults and young people to get involved in this process? Because in so many areas, our young people are missing. They have lost passion and excitement. One of the things that I love during this season, I'm seeing a burning flames of intolerance from so many young people who are just fed up with all of the devices that have been brought in our community to suppress. What are we doing nationally from your perspective in order to make sure we engage in them?
A significant part of it is social media. As much as I try to reduce my screen time, this is if we're going to be using it, we should be using it for the best and highest purpose. And, we should be using the tools at our fingertips, the Instagrams, the Twitters, the Facebooks of the world, the TikToks of the world, to get that message out. And, everybody has a voice. Whether or not you have 1,000 followers, you need to be using your voice. And frankly, not only does everyone have a voice, but everyone has a responsibility. One has a significant amount that they are displeased with or that they think should have been done a different way. Well, that starts with participation at the ballot box. And I don't think that, I don't think that any of us should look at the opportunity to speak over the next 58 days, the opportunity to encourage others to come out and participate. None of us should look at that as repetitive. None of us should look at that as onerous, because if you are a child who is in a cage on the border, or if you have been deported, or if your SNAP benefits have been cut, then I'm sure that you probably wish somebody had spoken out, or a few more people had come out and participated in the process. So the consequences of not participating are far greater. They far outweigh the bar of encouraging someone else to come out and participate. So I think we have to use these modern technology tools that we have, particularly if we're talking about reaching the younger demographic.
And at the end of the day, we must pay them. We must pay them. And so I have a $3.5 million grant, and I'm using that grant to pay my poll workers, because it's much more attractive for me to tell the group that I want, I'm paying you $40 an hour or $50 an hour. Then my recruitment becomes much easier, and the quality of poll worker enhances. We've got to pay them. We've got to pay people if you want them to do a good job. To get quality people, it costs. And so we're paying, and I think that's going to make a huge difference with this election.
When will the voter precinct information be sent out, mailed out?
So I guess you're seeing the sample ballot.
Yes.
That's mailed out 3 weeks prior to every election. We'll probably mail it out 4 weeks, a month outside the election, early October. The same time my vote centers were open. We drop our first piece of mail in 2 weeks, and that'll be the applications. A couple weeks after that will be the actual ballots, and then it begins for us.
Nationally, Don, are you seeing some things nationally that's on your heart that you just want people to get passionate about, that they are not being energized over?
Yeah, the main piece for me is the work begins on November 4th. Well, in respect to not, what I said earlier is that we don't expect to have results on the morning of November 4th. We'll give you a week. The work begins on November 10th. Given the elected officials that we prospectively will have at the state and local and federal level going into January, what do we want them to do? So assuming every election comes out in the way that anybody wants it to, now what? And what are we asking them to do on the policy level to make sure that we are not fighting these same voter suppression battles over and over and over? And that's what I'm hoping people understand and people get more passionate about. In the law, we talk about the procedural versus the substantive. Well, you never get to the substantive if the procedural was corrupt or if the procedural was corroded to begin with. We have got to fix the procedures of voting in this country in order to make sure that we can address any of the substantive issues that will move our country toward a more just and righteous place.
I'm excited that the two of you have come here tonight, because one of the things we need to do is provide the residents of Michigan with the information they need to make sure that every vote counts. And you've talked about training, you've talked about training, you talked about training. One of the things that we're doing even here at Triumph Church, we're partnering with you, because I'm not an armchair analyst. I don't sit back just controlling nothing but the remote control, condemning what someone else does, because it's easy when you're not on the field to talk about what they should have done. When you get up out the stand and you got to run that ball, when you got opposition and people standing in the way, it becomes a whole nother game. What would you say tonight to those that are listening in tune and will see this recording? What would you say to them tonight about engaging so that they take social responsibility?
Engagement is more than the actual vote. That's a significant part of it, but it's more than that. You have to participate in the process. You have to serve your neighbors. You have to allow your children to see you serving your community. You have got to help in the process. Work with us now. We're hiring now, 9 to 5. Everybody in the city of Detroit is not working. Somebody needs a job. We're hiring right now to start working with us so that we can get the mail out, so we can open the mail once it get in. And then, of course, election day workers, or in this case, election week workers. We need you to participate in the process heavily, because at the end of the day, it will do us no one any good at the end of election week and you don't like the outcome. Whatever that might be, I don't want to hear it if you don't participate. And one thing I've noticed, Pastor, is when I look at the rolls, some of the loudest mouths, some of the loudest complainers, when I just look their name up, they don't even vote consistently. So I turn my head and my hand to them, because I have nothing to say to you when you don't participate at the very basic level. But if you really want to see a difference, you have to be a part of the change. Work in the process. Help us to better serve our community. Help us to better administer elections by being a part of the process.
One of the things that I am an adamant believer of is that you got to tell your own story. Because if you don't tell your story, people will start writing it for you. And when they start writing it, they'll make something up. One of the things we wanted to do is to use Code Red as a platform in order to ask the questions that's on the mind of the residents in the community. But secondly, give them the information. This is not the only platform. Everyone has to use their platform. They have to use their influence. They have to use their realm of space and grace that God has given them in order to make sure that collectively we come together and we push an urban agenda. I am just excited tonight that the two of you have partnered with me to start this conversation because we want to engage them. One of the things that Triumph Church have done, we have put a link on our website. And so people can go to our website and sign up, and then we were going to turn those names over to you because you're talking about $600 a day.
That's right.
But even if you were not paying $600 a day, that vote, that count is incalculable. It's invaluable. And what we got to do, we can't put a price tag on it. We got to stop complaining and participate in this process if we want to see real change that's taking place in this country. Somebody bled and died for that right to vote. There's no such thing as somebody sitting to the sideline talking about they not going to vote. They not going to vote. Everyone not only has to cast that vote, but also we got to get involved in the process and make sure that when those votes are cast, that they are counted. Well, our time is wrapping up tonight. There's so much more that we could talk about, and we'll continue these conversations. But I want to give the two of you an opportunity to give closing remarks or closing examples, explanation to the community, or any information that you want to pass along.
I'd just like to say, first and foremost, thank you for this opportunity. You know, because oftentimes you do tell your stories, but by the time the public sees it, it's rewritten, it's edited, and it's nothing like what you shared. So I appreciate the opportunity to tell the story of what it takes to administer an election. In the city of Detroit, my only desire is to ensure that every voter has easy access to that ballot box, to ensure that every voter knows when election day is, what's on the ballot, and when they can expect their ballot and when they can expect to vote. My charge and my only charge has always been not the politics, and that's why I'm not so well liked by the politicians. I don't play politics. I do my job, and my job is to ensure that every voter has a right and an opportunity to cast their ballot, period. So I just want to encourage my Detroiters to come on out, exercise your right. Not only exercise your right, but participate in the process, because we need you. We need you. And I wouldn't ask for you if we didn't need you, but we need you, and we're going to respect your time because we're going to pay you well. So come on, be with us. Call 313-876-0231, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Someone will be there to receive your call and process your application. Thank you.
Don, I hope this is not the last time. What you're doing on the national level is so important. I hope this won't be the last time you come and talk with us and share all this relevant and significant information. The people need to know how to support what you're doing nationally. And so can you give them that?
Sure. Anybody can always go to nvpactionfund.org. It's National Voter Protection Action Fund.org. And frankly, shameless plug, we support organic leadership organizations who are on the ground in swing states and in crucial cities in swing states. We support them with grants. We give money to the activists who are making sure that they have actionable voter protection plans. Hashtag I got 5 on voter protection. There have been times in my life where I've had $5 on much lesser causes. So we ask that anybody who can give $5 to help us protect the vote, primarily in African American communities and poor communities throughout the country. But first of all, Pastor, to you, you stand in the great tradition of Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie and Charles Gilchrist Adams and those who have intentionally, since the African got to this country, who have intentionally used the house of God as a platform for community engagement as well as worship. And that is perhaps one of the most crucial elements that has sustained our community for 400 years now. We honor and respect and thank you for doing that, because you do not have to do that. You have opened up this house, which is such a powerful platform. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Secondly, Madam Clerk, so much of the burden as well as the responsibility as well as the joy of leadership is showing up. I honor and respect you for showing up. And we as a community, not only of African Americans, but of those who want to see justice and community, we respect those and we remember those who showed up as well as those who don't. but we elevate and respect those who showed up, particularly when you certainly could have anticipated not the easiest questions coming today, but we appreciate the effort that you have put into administering these elections, but also for carrying the burden of leadership, which so much of which is showing up. People need to have a plan to vote, a plan to administer elections, and a plan to legislate and administer policy in the coming years to make sure that we can get out of this cycle of voter suppression. Plan, plan, plan to protect our vote.
Thank you, City Clerk Winfrey. Thank you, Don Calloway, for sharing with us tonight. Dr. Martin Luther King said it best. He said, the character of a man is not demonstrated and defined because of where he stands in the time of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in the time of crisis. We are in the midst of a voter suppression crisis, and you don't need to be locked in the stand. You need to make sure that you get engaged in the fight. This is not a playground, as I often say. This is a battleground, and we need real soldiers on the battlefield. I want to thank you for joining us tonight, but I want to thank you in advance for making a decision that you're going to participate in the democratic process. And secondly, you're going to make yourself available in order to protect every vote, to make sure every vote counts. This is just the first of many conversations that we're going to have. Next week, we're going to be sitting down with senatorial candidate John James in order to get him to answer some questions that we got on our mind as it relates to our community concerns. Following him, we will have the incumbent United States Senator Gary Peters. He will be sharing with us. And then following them, we will have the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. She will be with us. And then also Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel will be with us as well. They're going to be here to talk about the things that are on the mind of those of us in our community in order to help us move our agenda forward. I want to thank you tonight, but circle your calendar, make a date, text somebody, email them, hit them up. Tell them every Sunday night at 6 o'clock, it's Code Red, Critical Community Conversation. God bless you. Thank you, guests, for sharing with us. And God bless those of you that are sharing with us virtually. And I'll see you soon.